One that one that requires systematic and transformative change to begin to even tackle. No one organization or industry here today can address this challenge alone. In particular, we at USAID realize that the private sector has a pivotal role to play in developing climate smart innovations and promoting climate smart agriculture. The business case for climate adaptation is clear. Demand for climate resilient infrastructure and products is growing. Drought and flood resistant crops have higher yields than other crops. Public investment in early warning systems and climate insurance is booming. Usually incentives for private companies, they usually have incentives with private companies to invest alongside us. At the same time, climate change means short-term profits in private sector will render many business models irrelevant. Swiss Re Group estimates that the global GDP could shrink by 18% by 2050 if global temperatures are allowed to rise by 3 degrees centigrade. Those unprepared will lose out, and their customers and workforce will suffer for it. USAID wants to work with companies of all sizes, domestic and international, to demonstrate the case for investing in adaptation and resilience, and to build a future in which communities are able to thrive. By working with USAID, that has a footprint in over 150 countries, businesses can leverage our capabilities, relationships, operational know-how, and convening power. We can support businesses' sustainable sourcing, resilient supply chains, and responsible community engagement. If you haven't heard, Feed the Future is USAID's the US government's global hunger and food security initiative led by USAID. Partnerships with the private sector have long been a key part of Feed the Future and our food system transformation efforts. USAID is working with private companies in areas such as climate smart agriculture, smallholder adaptation and livelihoods, SME finance, and deforestation to help countries in achieving their climate goals. We at USAID and the US government have set some really ambitious targets. President Biden launched the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, otherwise known as PREPARE, that has set a really bold goal to help more than 500 million people in the world's most vulnerable countries and communities in the developing world to adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change by 2030. To make this target, we need a whole of society effort, including the private sector. The share of private sector dollars spent on adaptation right now is really marginal. Less than 2% of all climate finance comes from private sector for adaptation. Therefore, Prepare has launched a global call to action for businesses to make new significant commitments to signal the critical importance of building climate resilience in partner countries. USAID has also developed new tools like the Climate Finance for Development Accelerator, or CFDA, which is a mechanism to leverage up to $250 million from USG sources over 8 years, which will in turn seek to mobilize $2.5 billion of public and private climate investments by 2030. Another significant initiative is the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, or AIM4C. It's a 5-year joint US-UAE-led initiative that's driving investment and accelerated action for ag R&D and innovation for climate smart agriculture and food systems. AIM4C has raised over $13 billion from over 50 governments and 800 partners to date. One example of an innovation sprint is in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, where USAID and OFI and other partners like Nestle, Mars, Wrigley, Costco Wholesale, Mondelez International, and Blommer Chocolate Company are helping cocoa farmers grow their incomes more sustainably using climate smart agriculture. Partners are investing $7 million toward this effort to support 15,000 cocoa farmers by 2027, of which at least 25% will be women. Now, why we're all here, I want to pass it over to, I'm really excited to welcome Daniela Maor and Eileen Gallagher, who led the development of this guide for their deep dive in how businesses can be a central part of the solution to addressing climate adaptation. Over to you, Daniela and Eileen. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Keith. We're really excited to be here with all of you today. As Keith mentioned, I'm Daniela Maor, and I lead the private sector engagement work on USAID's Feed the Future Market Systems and Partnerships activity. I work for a company called DAI, which is an international development consulting firm, which designs and implements projects and activities on behalf of USAID, other donors, and corporate clients around the world and across sectors. Over to you, Eileen, for your introduction.
Thanks, Daniela. So yes, I'm Eileen Gallagher. I'm a climate director at BSR. BSR is a sustainable business network and consultancy. We focus on advisory, collaboration, and research. Our climate practice, we work with companies to help manage their climate risks, reduce emissions, and advance climate resilience and justice. So it's been really great to help produce this guide that really emphasizes many of those elements: the need for greater partnership to drive climate resilience in communities that really need it most. Thanks.
Thanks, Eileen. And before I go through today's agenda, I just wanted to highlight that this guide is really a product of a complementary set of expertise, experiences, and perspectives. DAI really brought to the table the international development expertise and the expertise in engaging the private sector as a modality for international development. And we really leaned on BSR, who brought the climate expertise and also the firsthand perspective from their sustainability consulting practice with corporates on the leading trends in adaptation practices, and also what they've seen firsthand with their clients in the challenges in adaptation. So today, what we'll go over with you is I'll just discuss briefly in my introduction how this guide came to be. Then I'll turn it over to Eileen, who will go through the set of private sector practices in climate adaptation and some remaining gaps as well. I'll then go over the strategic opportunity identification tool, which really helps development practitioners determine what climate challenge to focus on, what solution to utilize, who to partner with, and to what end. And then Eileen is going to provide you with an overview of our partnership blueprints or partnership models. And then we'll go through a 20-minute Q&A with you all. Next slide, please. So why did we need this resource and how did it come to be? So during the drafting of USAID's 2022 to 2030 climate strategy, Keith Dacko, who just introduced us, reached out to us because he knew that engagement with the private sector was going to be a really important modality to achieve the objectives in USAID's climate strategy. And there was also an acknowledgement that a guide to help support development practitioners in determining who to partner with and what to partner on didn't exist. There's nothing out there of this sort that we were aware of. So he asked us to produce this guide. And why do we even need this resource? It's because there have been a lot of global adaptation efforts to date, both on the public side and on the private side, but those efforts haven't generated the widespread action that's needed to rise to the challenge that we face today. On the private sector side, companies tend to do their own adaptation efforts. There's no best practice that's really widespread and established. Companies, they are challenged to get access to some of the leading edge scientific research, or certainly a digestible form of that research that they can use to support business decisions. A lot of times companies are in the position of needing to respond to extreme events rather than prepare for them in advance. And on the public side, countries have their national adaptation plans, but a lot of times there's no concrete implementation strategy that accompany those plans. And a lot of times countries struggle to get funding to actually go ahead and finance those plans. Another reason why we need this resource is because, as Keith mentioned up front, finance hasn't kept up with the adaptation costs. The return on investment timelines for adaptation activities are going to be a lot longer than the typical time horizons for return on investment. And so that makes it really hard for companies to internally get approval to pursue adaptation actions, and also to get funding for adaptation activities and measures. And then, as Keith mentioned, addressing climate change is one of the top priorities for the US government. He talked about prepare, he talked about aim for C. It's also a top priority for lots of other national governments around the world. It's one of the most pressing needs that is, that humankind faces today. And so USAID and other development actors can really play a critical role that nobody else is playing today in fostering increased public-private coordination and collaboration to address some of the barriers to establishing widespread action to adapt to climate change. And moreover, climate change is a threat that is shared both by the business community and the development community. And by partnering or collaborating together to overcome that threat, or to adapt to that threat, we can generate shared value. Business-driven actions of the private sector to build their own operational resilience and resilience of their own supply chains also provides societal co-benefits to participant groups that USAID and other donors care about the most, like suppliers, like workers. The business-driven actions of these companies can help to protect the ecosystems that the companies are based in, and also to help protect these other participant groups by adapting to climate change. And then secondly, private sector engagement, involvement, and investment is a really critical part of the funding landscape, because businesses are going to need to make their own investments in ecosystem, infrastructure, and community actions to ensure their resilience. And that's also going to help to provide resilience, enable resilience, enhance resilience of these communities. Over. So our guide has four main sections. The first section, which Eileen is going to present next, is a summary of the latest trends in private sector practices to adapt to climate change, and also a summary of the remaining gaps in action. The second component, as I mentioned in our agenda, is this strategic opportunity identification tool that helps development practitioners figure out what to partner on, who to partner with, and to what end are we seeking to partner. The third section of the guide presents 6 different partnership blueprints or design models to guide the co-creation or co-design of partnerships with private sector counterparts. And then the fourth and final section is a set of vignettes or short case studies that brings to life each of the partnership blueprints. And with that, I will turn it over to Eileen.
Thank you. And also just a quick reminder to please leave any questions you have or comments into the Q&A box. You'll be able to find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So in this report, or in this guide, we defined a list of core concepts related to climate adaptation. We used and centered our work on USAID's definition of climate adaptation that you'll see here on this slide. One interesting finding is that the private sector tends to infrequently refer to climate adaptation. Rather, they refer to concepts of climate risk or climate resilience, And in their use of this, there's no real widely accepted definition that they're using of resilience, despite there being definitions in the public domain, IPCC, et cetera. They are not necessarily all referring to the same definition. So it's important to know, especially when we're talking about communication and collaboration, that we might be approaching this from different terminology. Next, please. And while there are several established pathways for companies to address climate mitigation, so say energy efficiency measures, renewable energy, shifting away from fossil fuels, recognized modalities for business action on climate adaptation and resilience is more limited. Climate adaptation also tends to be perceived by businesses as taking the back seat in climate action. For decades, we all have been prioritizing mitigation to ward off future impacts of climate change. Unfortunately, we are now seeing firsthand the impacts of climate change, so we can no longer put adaptation in that backseat, but put it at equal footing to mitigation. And many of today's business efforts on adaptation and resilience really originate from disaster risk reduction, or DRR, efforts. In addition to DRR, companies have deployed, say, corporate social responsibility, or CSR, or philanthropic efforts over the past several decades to respond to natural disasters and other one-off weather events. And to more of today's work around sustainability, where they're integrating that work into business models. Now, more than other sectors, food, beverage, and agriculture, or FBA companies, have been quite engaged in addressing climate-related risks. This is to ensure quality and consistent crop yields. So companies that tend to be quite dependent directly on natural resources, you'll see perhaps more examples of identifying or trying to address climate risk and build resilience or adaptation. And there are several drivers that prompt businesses to commit to and invest in adaptation. For example, a sense of urgency. Some of the global reports, or even the latest IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment report, particularly from last year, 2022, that really focused in particular on adaptation, convinced this sense of urgency to act. Businesses also need to maintain operation and supply chain continuity. They want to minimize their exposure and vulnerability to physical climate risks. And another prompt or driver would be to respond to stakeholder demand and pressure. So 6 years ago, when the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, or more recently, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, these frameworks that are pushing for companies to assess and disclose their nature or climate-related risks. And in some jurisdictions where there's mandates for companies to disclose their risk, certainly companies are seeing the need that they may need to step up to this challenge, or in some cases even comply to assess and manage their risk. But nevertheless, businesses' efforts on adaptation initiatives and investments are not happening at the pace or scale that's needed. And the gaps are a result of limited finance and budgets that are allocated to adaptation. Companies have limited experience and difficulties in quantifying the costs of inaction, and difficulties in quantifying the return on investment, or the ROI, on adaptation. Climate adaptation initiatives typically to address climate risks and happen over multiple timeframes, so including the longer term of, say, 10 to 50 years. But this longer time span tends to exceed that of conventional business plans, which might focus on the next 3 to 5 years. So this misalignment between time spans can prevent adaptation investments, as they really compete with, say, more of a traditional ROI of investment of a company. There's also limited awareness and knowledge. So climate risk management still remains somewhat new and challenging for companies, and we'll be addressing that in a bit more detail in the next several minutes. And certainly limited communication around adaptation needs and available options is another particular gap. You may have knowledge of climate risks, but then what might be the intervention to address that risk or the adaptation solution to address that risk? And also because these adaptation solutions tend to be quite localized, that may not always be a one size fits all. But then in some cases, even some of the good practice that can be shared is not communicating or flowing well from, say, corporate and down through supply chains. Next. So to close these gaps, we've identified 5 particular areas for greater public-private coordination and collaboration. And one in particular, of course, being around raising awareness and engaging the private sector on adaptation. There could certainly be help in terms of translating the complex scientific data projections to the layman, or in business terms, what does this mean for your operations or supply chain in particular markets or geographies? The second is around providing business-specific guidance and adaptation. Sometimes there's solutions, but it might be geared more for a technical audience. So how can we translate this into a business audience? How can we help quantify some of those really difficult pieces that I mentioned? The third is around facilitating knowledge transfer. So in some of the conversations we had, there might be knowledge at the corporate strategy level or at the buyer level, but that knowledge is not necessarily translated again through the supply chain. The fourth would be around promoting particular adaptation solutions for businesses. Could it be around helping to build more resilient operations and supply chains through scaling up nature-based solutions? We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. Could it be about developing new products and services to help others be more resilient? So expanding new market opportunities, providing new technology services. And the fifth would be around accelerating more innovative climate adaptation finance. So how can we help de-risk some of these investments? How can we help make the investments more attractive for businesses, given that to date, more of the funding on adaptation has come from the public sector? How can we mobilize that private sector funding to make it more attractive to them? So we'll talk more about all of these most of these opportunities in just a moment. Next.
Thanks, Eileen. So before Eileen gets into all the details of our partnership models based on the gaps that she just summarized, I'm going to go through what we've called in our guide a strategic opportunity identification tool, which is really a tool that's meant for development practitioners to source information directly from market actors in the field to determine what they should partner on, who they should partner with, and what they aim to achieve with the partnership. The tool itself is really a set of questions or considerations for the development practitioner to go through as they're sourcing this information from different market actors. The first step really concerns itself with identifying the climate risk to focus on in the subsector and geography where you're working, and then the corresponding solutions. The second step focuses on assessing the impact of the policy and regulatory framework in the country that you're working in on climate adaptation action. Is it supportive? Could it be more supportive, or does it provide constraints to action? The third step focuses on identifying the most strategic private sector partners. The fourth step focuses on selecting the right design model or partnership blueprint. And the fifth step focuses on the design co-creation process to really figure out what each party is going to contribute to the partnership, how decisions are going to be made, and how to instill certain principles of decision-making and mutual accountability throughout the design process that will then fuel the implementation process. You could throw a lot of resources in terms of time and financial into completing all these steps. Step 1 through step 5 if you're starting from scratch, or you could really adapt this tool to fit your particular needs. So for example, if you're already working on an activity on the ground and you know you've already identified the climate risk, you've already identified the right solution, you already have a really good idea of the policy and regulatory environment and how it's either incentivizing or impeding adaptation action, you could start at step 3 and you could figure out who is the most strategic partner, and then move on to step 4 and 5. Or maybe you already know the companies that you want to partner with. Maybe you've already gone through that process. So you're going to really just focus on step 4 or 5. So in summary, this could be as intensive of a process as you need it to be, or it could actually really be quite light touch. So now I'll just go through a little bit more in depth each step of this tool. Next, please. So this first step of the tool really focuses on defining the shared climate risks to both businesses and USAID's core participant groups, like suppliers, like workers, that are really the most pressing, the most urgent in the geographies and sectors of focus. And so we go through questions like, what are the shared risks to each of to the businesses and also to USAID's core participant group? What are companies already doing to assess and to address that risk? What adaptation options can enhance resilience for both companies and also for suppliers, for workers? Does the financier and investor ecosystem actually incentivize risk disclosure and management or not? And what is the supply of finance to support adaptation? So here you're just really focusing on defining the problem and how you're going to address it next. Yeah, thank you. So here we're focusing on really identifying the public sector commitments, both in terms of policies, regulations, and plans that actually might incentivize private sector action or that are currently actually impeding private sector action. We're going to, through this step, uncover the gaps in public engagement and public support for climate adaptation to identify really key areas where USAID or any other donor or development actor can incentivize public action to really foster a more favorable enabling environment to incentivize private sector action. So here we're considering 2 main questions. The first is, does the country's policy and regulatory framework incentivize actors to adapt to climate change? And how could government actually play a more supportive role in creating a more favorable enabling environment that is going to foster and expand climate adaptation efforts? And what's really key to this step is this notion that a partnership between USAID and a company or another donor and a company is not just a bilateral relationship. There are other market actors that need to be party, that need to participate in that relationship to make a partnership successful, because the company is going to be working within a set of constraints that are specific to that geography and to that sector, but also because through the partnership, we're trying to shine a light on a challenge that is true not just for that one partnership, that one company, but really that is a shared challenge by other like companies in a similar sector in the same geography, so that this partnership can really reap benefits beyond the single partnership transaction, that it can continue to sort of make small shifts within a market system that will improve things both for other companies and then other USAID's core participant groups, like the suppliers, like the workers. Next, please. Now we're figuring out who are the most strategic companies to partner with. A lot of times, at least in my experience, on the ground, you have companies coming to you saying, like, we want to partner in this, we want to partner in that. And this tool really helps the development practitioner to go through a systematic process to figure out how are companies already impacted by this climate threat? What are they already doing on their own to address the threat? And how influential are they in the system? How influential are they in terms of affecting the core participant groups that USAID cares about? And so by working with one of this single partner or consortium of partners, for example, is USAID or another development actor going to be able to bring sustained benefit to these other core participant groups, the suppliers, the workers, to better adapt to climate change in a sustained way over the long term to enhance their own resilience? And so the questions within this section of the tool really focus on the roles, the motivation, and the influence of the potential company partners in adapting to climate change, because you want to make sure that there is going to be incentives. There's going to be motivation, and the incentive system is going to be aligned in such a way over the long term that ability to enhance resilience of the core participant groups is going to be sustained over the long term. We can switch on to the next section now. And the fourth section focuses on selecting the partnership blueprint. And so Eileen's going to go through the 6 partnership blueprints with you that we've included in this guide. I should say up front that that is not an exhaustive set of potential design models. There are others as well. We just couldn't include every single possibility within one guide. And so, within this part of the tool, we're figuring out like what is the right design model to address the problem that was uncovered in the first section and to achieve the intended impact. And so here we're going to really consider how USAID can facilitate private sector involvement and investment to manage climate risks and invest in adaptation measures over the long term. And we're going to determine which partnership blueprint or other kind of design model is best suited to address the specific risks with the specific set of partners, and also determining what impact the partnership could achieve. And here, I just want to highlight that we really need to figure out whether USAID's collaboration is essential to the partner. Like, can the potential company partner uptake these adaptation practices on their own without USAID support, or is USAID support critical? And is that support and collaboration and partnership going to lead to scaled practice from that one company partner and other like partners as well? And is it going to reap sustained benefit, adaptation, and resilience benefits to the core participant groups over the long term? Those are some key considerations and in determining who to partner with and how. And then the final phase of this tool is the design the co-creation of the partnership or collaboration. And so here we're figuring out what does each party bring to the table in terms of financial contribution, in terms of technical expertise, in terms of human resource contribution, in terms of relationship brokering, in terms of knowledge sharing. Being really upfront with those expectations will lead to increased mutual accountability, satisfaction, and trust, starting from the design process and then all the way through implementation. And then figuring out what does USAID need to do to maximize the partnership success. And so really like having USAID think of themselves or another development actor as an active participant. Is not just about designing a partnership and then kind of, wiping your hands clean and moving on. It's really about what kind of engagement is needed throughout the implementation process. Another key consideration is what is the best way to set up the partnership? So how are decisions going to be made? Are you going to set up some kind of steering committee? Who is going to be on that steering committee? Besides just USAID and the donor, the implementing partner, and the private sector partner, do you need other public sector actors perhaps to be on the steering committee as well? How are you gonna support each other through unanticipated problems that come up? How are decisions going to be made for things that come up that are not anticipated? How are you going to support each other in troubleshooting problems as you go along? These are the kinds of things we want to establish in the design process. And then finally, what are the key monitoring, evaluation, and learning areas for the partnership? There are things that the donor is going to care about, like USAID. There are things also that the company partner is going to want to learn from. And how do you set up a set of metrics, a monitoring system that is going to meet the information and learning needs from both sides? And how can you set that up in such a way that's the least burdensome for both parties? And now it's over to you, Eileen.
Thanks. So based on the opportunities that I had mentioned earlier, we really defined 3 particular areas for greater public-private partnership to advance adaptation. One would be around encouraging learning and strengthening business capacity. The second is around ecosystems resilience to address climate threats and advance solutions. And the third is developing financial tools and incentives. One important note is that while the private sector certainly has an essential role to play in advancing adaptation, say by providing new technologies, business models, and investment opportunities, they can't and they haven't been acting alone. Governments certainly have an essential role in then creating that favorable environment that gives confidence to businesses to invest in adaptation. And that will come to life a little bit more over the next few minutes. The public sector can provide, for example, concessional financing or guarantees to catalyze private investment, help fund important research and development efforts. So there are several examples that we'll call out or that we have called out in some of these blueprints or these models for partnership. Next, please. Now, falling under the 3 areas I mentioned, we developed these 6 partnership blueprints. You can see them here around the circle. They're comprehensive enough to serve as concrete implementation frameworks, yet broad enough to be adjusted to address the specific needs of different geographies and different contexts. So each of these 3 areas has 2 blueprints each, as you can see here. I won't read them out loud, but they range from promoting adaptation solutions between existing buyer and supplier coalitions, so taking existing structures and understanding how we can insert a particular focus on climate adaptation, to scaling up parametric insurance or index-based insurance to incentivize adaptation solutions. So again, in the essence of time, I will walk you through 3 of these blueprints, but of course encourage you to take a look at all of them in the guide. Next. The first one I'll speak to is around strengthening business capacity to establish climate risk management systems. So many businesses are really underprepared and lack, broadly speaking, are underprepared and lack the risk management systems that would help them identify and manage their climate risks. They might lack applicable or affordable programmatic tools, or they may simply not know where to start. Some companies may have an enterprise risk management system or risk register, but it may not include climate-related risks. And some companies may lack climate risk management systems altogether, particularly SMEs or local companies. Now, a climate risk management system can help empower businesses to be more resilient against future threats. It can give confidence to investors and other business partners that they can maintain business continuity amidst a changing climate. Of course, climate risk management is essential to protect people and the environment where a business operates or a business depends on, and potentially can help businesses respond to increasing regulation in some jurisdictions where there's mandatory company disclosure of climate risk. Now, a development organization or USAID could come into this in this particular blueprint, come into this and offer strategic advisory or coaching support focused, say, on creating templates for climate risk management systems that companies can easily understand and adopt to get them started. The agency can help convene businesses and train them on the system or train them on how to identify these risks. Perhaps provide, say, one-on-one or ad hoc risk adaptation or finance support, say 1 year after a formal training. Or an agency can help engage local regulators to promote climate risk disclosure, promote perhaps mandatory disclosure, again, to get climate risk management more mainstream. I'll pause for a moment and say that each of the blueprints that we have in this guide, you'll see where we suggest USAID or another development agency playing a role, as outlined here in red. We also understand that a development agency may want to pull in others to assist. In this case, it might be that the development agency or implementing partner would like to hire a corporate climate risk management advisor, or a technical adaptation expert, or even a financial advisor to help calculate some of those financial costs. So we provide each of these suggestions, we provide these suggestions in each of these blueprints that we have in the guide. Next, please. The next blueprint I'll speak to is around piloting nature-based solutions to engage enterprise resilience. Now, you may be familiar with nature-based solutions for their role in climate mitigation, but they also have an important role to play in adaptation, and this really makes them attractive given their multiple benefits on climate, but also on society too, and their role in providing or jobs or employment or other societal benefits. Now, although nature-based solutions are being mainstreamed at the government level, implementation of the solutions are not happening fast enough to really adequately respond to climate impacts. The amount of international public funding dedicated to nature-based solutions, or NBS, is relatively small. It's accounting for approximately 1% of total climate finance flows. So they require financing, they require collaboration and technical capacity. Nature-based solutions are applicable for many businesses. You might think of food, beverage, or agriculture companies as the most obvious, given their reliance on nature and biodiversity. But nature can also help protect hard physical assets, say manufacturing facilities, or data centers for the tech industry, or real estate for the building sector or hospitality industry. So these nature-based solutions can certainly be useful solution to multiple business sectors. In this particular blueprint, a development organization could help get a pilot off the ground. In this particular case, it would be convening and engaging several companies to implement this localized pilot, again, because the adaptation solution often needs to be quite specific and to that local environment and the local challenges and risks, the climate risks. In this particular case, we're seeing an example where a nature-based solution or solutions can benefit multiple businesses in a local area and benefit the communities and ecosystems surrounding in the surrounding area. They can collectively identify the climate risks that are disrupting business operations, negatively affecting the communities or ecosystems' well-being, and then help launch this pilot by developing a governance structure that really helps to represent the different stakeholders' interests and partners' contributions. This independent, unbiased leadership structure can help convene and bring businesses together to ensure that the trust is built and can be maintained. Of course, it'd be helpful to hire then the adaptation technical advisors to train, implement, and maintain the nature-based solution, and potentially even engage local policymakers to promote this enabling environment for businesses to then invest in the nature-based solution. So In some, these are a range of supporting activities that a development organization or agency can help undertake to get a pilot off the ground in a local market. Next. The last blueprint I'll share with you is around scaling up parametric insurance to incentivize adaptation solutions. It's likely that you're familiar with parametric or index-based insurance. It can help provide business coverage from damage from an extreme weather event, and it helps trigger an immediate or very quick payout. But it's not widely adopted, and I'd say companies remain largely uninsured against climate risk, and they also are not investing in adaptation at the scale that they ought to. So this is a result of a company really risking double jeopardy: a lack of preparedness to rebound from climate risks and a lack of funds to rebuild. There's also this limited awareness and incentive amongst businesses to both buy insurance and invest in adaptation. While insurance packages the options are certainly expanding, they're falling short of the need. So in this particular case, a development organization can help convene insurance providers, insurance brokers, to train them on how these payouts can be triggered and how to calculate the payouts for uninsured businesses. Help draw connections for businesses on the need for this type of insurance and how the payouts work. And then to add an innovative approach to this, we are recommending that businesses can receive discounts on their premiums if they can, say, demonstrate investments in adaptation to reduce risk. And finally, development agencies can also help engage local policymakers to encourage companies to incentivize adaptation solutions by, say, subsidizing the premium discount, or perhaps offering tax incentives that could incentivize the businesses to adopt the adaptation solution. So you'll see here in this blueprint, we're marrying two different elements, right? The need for greater coverage through this parametric insurance, while also encouraging or incentivizing adaptation solutions to reduce climate risk. Next, please. So those were a quick overview of 3 of the blueprints from the guide. There are 3 additional ones I mentioned that we certainly encourage you to review. For each one, we offer an illustrative vignette or a short case study. They're real-life examples of the blueprints. They provide lessons in collaboration that's certainly relevant when establishing new partnerships in these focus areas. We'll say that they weren't easy to find because we tried to develop more innovative approaches. So the vignettes are not perfectly aligned and not perfect examples. It's also because examples of adaptation from the corporate sector are still nascent, still emerging. But nevertheless, they do shine good learnings that ought to be considered when bringing these blueprints to life. So that's a good overview of the blueprints, and certainly encourage you to take a look at those and also take a look at the vignettes that are in the guide. And now I'll turn back to Keith, who will wrap us up with a Q&A session.
All right. Thank you, Daniela and Eileen. This is great. We are really, really excited about this tool and encourage you to use it, look at it. We'll share everything after the webinar. The challenge is large. We're in uncharted waters here, and we're really excited about this tool, and it provides practical and market-driven solutions. There's some really good questions in the chat, and so I would like to get to a few of them and pose those to our panelists, and hopefully we can get to a few. We have a few minutes here. One being over to Eileen and Daniela. There was a question from Glenn. What did research show? Did the research show in areas where companies could have an interest in collaborating in the face of these new reporting requirements? And how do you get past, like, for example, how do you get past reporting discussions, to talk about and partners on adaptation? So how do you talk to them, and where's the research there that's backing this up?
I'll start, and Daniela, feel free to chime in. So what Glenn is referring to is that in some jurisdictions there are requirements or existing or forthcoming mandates for companies to assess and disclose their risks. So this would be in alignment with that TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. I'd say this is getting companies really thinking about how they're assessing their risk and what to disclose, to what extent would a disclosure be adequate to satisfy investors or other needs. The intent behind this disclosure is that the investor community came together and we're seeking consistent, comparable quality data to ensure that the investments that they're making are sound in these companies that say might be more at climate risk. And that climate risk can cover both the mitigation and adaptation side, right? So both transition risk as you move away from fossil fuels, and physical risk in the face of extreme weather events or more gradual climate risks. I'd say it's great to see the TCFD today in terms of it's making companies think about it, not just in terms of disclosure, but integrating climate risk management into their systems. It's certainly not where it ought to be. But the bigger piece now, and this is where the conversations should be turning, and hopefully this answers your question, Glenn, is once you assess your risk, what is the intervention or the adaptation solution to address those risks? That's where I think there's a real need for greater conversation to help companies think from, okay, I've assessed and I've disclosed, but how am I going to reduce that risk over time? I think that's really key. And that's where it's quite challenging, because there's not always a one-size solution that fits all. It can be different per sector, business sector, different certainly per geography, and the locations where you're operating, the context, cultural nuance, et cetera. But I think those types of discussions and I think that's where some of our blueprints are coming to life, are helping to bring this to life a little bit more. Of we need to move from climate risk assessment and disclosure is key, but now we need to talk also about what is the adaptation solution to help reduce those risks.
Great. Thank you for that. Another question came in from Steve and asking about the time frame. What's your time frame in developing and maintaining these partnerships? And in other words, what can private sector partners expect to realize? When can they expect to realize some benefit? I think that's a really key question, and a lot of people wondering. I'm sure that it's a little bit nuanced, but I'd like to pose that question to you.
Maybe I can start, Eileen, and then you can add in. So I think, earlier on, Eileen and I both said that the time horizon for return on investment for many of these adaptation measures is oftentimes a lot longer than the typical considerations, the 3 to 5 year business decision-making timelines. And that is true, but in most of our models, in fact, in all of our models, you can have some benefit within a typical 3 to 5 year time frame of a typical partnership life cycle. The risk assessment one would be shorter, really helping businesses to understand and assess their risk. And then developing, if you continued on with the other partnership model, developing the integrated risk management system, that would take longer. So I think for all of these, our partnership models would enable a business to pilot a practice or a measure, and see some initial benefit from it. Eileen, do you have anything? No.
I think you got it. Thanks.
All right, great. Maybe we can get 1 or 2 quick questions left here. Let me take one from Mandud. He asks, is partnership blueprint a part of the co-creation?
Yeah, so partnership blueprint is part of the co-creation. You would have to align with your partner on what risk you're trying to address and what solution would best alleviate that risk. And those are all embedded within the partnership blueprints. And like we said up front, this is not an exhaustive list of design models that you could use, but this is certainly part of that co-creation, co-design process. We're sorry that we don't have more time for questions. We definitely have appreciated hearing from you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to point out this last slide that this guide was produced by USAID's Market Systems and Partnerships activity. And our whole mission is to advance learning and good practice in private sector engagement and market systems development. So if you're interested in learning more from us and learning more about our other products, you can follow this our page on this AgriLink site, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter here. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate it. Encourage you to check out the guide and give us your feedback. Take care, everyone. Thanks.